It looked like somebody was bent over and had their head in the window of the deer blind. It either heard me or smelt me, and he pulled his head out of the tent and stood straight up, and that shocked me. They don't make people that big.
The way it moved, almost as if it was gliding across the beach. I've never seen anything move like that in my life. They were screaming at each other in gibberish. It sounded like a language, and they were chuntering away back and forwards, back and forwards, back and forwards. I know what a bear looks like, and there is no way on this planet that what I saw were bears.
911, what are you reporting?
Jesus Christ, you better...
Sir?
Gio!
Hello?
Get somebody out here.
What's going on now, sir?
That son of a bitch is about 6'9", I don't know.
Do you see him now, sir?
Yes, I'm looking right at him.
Uh-oh.
This is Greg Andrews from Orlando, Florida, and you're listening to Sasquatch Chronicles.
Welcome to the show, everyone. Thanks for being here tonight. Got a great show planned for you tonight. We're going to be chatting with Jake, and Jake comes to us from Texas, kind of outside of the Fort Worth area. He grew up way out in the country, and on this property that he grew up on, a lot of really bizarre things happened to him. A lot of sightings, too, as well. So he'll be sharing that with us tonight. And then later in life, Jake actually had a few other encounters we'll talk about. If you've had an encounter and you'd like to be on the show, shoot me an email. My email address is wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. And if you get a chance, check out sasquatchchronicles.com. You can become a member and get additional shows. Let's jump into it tonight. I want to welcome Jake to the show. Jake, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, of course, man. It's my pleasure.
Yeah, I appreciate you coming on, Jake. And I know you grew up on this property, and there was a lot of sightings, a lot of really weird things that happened to you and your family. And then later in life, you actually had a few more encounters. What I'd like to do is start with this property that you grew up on. If you would, tell us a little bit about the property and walk us into what happened to you and your family.
Yeah, no problem. So I guess I would say the... started out, the first time that really ever had anything happen was when I was a kid, and we actually lived in this really small town called Lipan. It's like the size of a block. It's very, very small. It's got one gas station, and it's out in hill country because it's pretty much nothing but hills and really tall grass out there. We lived on this dirt road that was probably like 7 to 10 miles long maybe, and it was off of a main highway. It wasn't paved or anything, just dirt and rocks, and didn't really have much of neighbors around you. You're kind of secluded around the woods. And my dad, he had worked for this rock truck company at the time, and he used one of their trucks to pull us like a new house home, like a double wide. And he actually ended up connecting that house to the one that we were actually living in already with a hallway. And my sister got the back bedroom of that house. Right next to that bedroom, there is a bathroom, and I actually was in that bathroom taking a bath that night. And me and my brother's bedroom was on the other side of that bathroom, and I was in that bathroom taking a bath, and I heard my sister just, she was screaming, just screaming, like she was terrified, or like maybe she'd hurt herself or something, and so naturally everybody comes to look. I threw a towel on myself, and we go into her bedroom, and in her bedroom, she has this big window, like a double window that faces the woods. that's like probably like, I don't know, 50 yards out. And there's a tree branch out there, and it kind of has like a U shape to it. It kind of drops low in one spot. And there's this big black mass that's standing there at the tree. I mean, you can see it, clear as day, something standing there. And I mean, it's as tall as that tree branch is. And that tree branch is actually pretty tall. My dad used to hang a tire swing from there for us, and he's about 6 foot or so. And he would have to stand on a ladder, pretty high up it actually, to get a rope tied around this branch. So, whatever was standing there, was really tall. And, kind of like the very first thing that you thought of was like, my sister, she was a teenager. So, you might have thought like, oh, maybe one of her, her boyfriends or something were, trying to be like a peeping Tom or something. But I mean, this thing was huge, and we were all just kind of standing there, like everyone was quiet. Next thing you know, my dad, he runs through the house, and he goes out there and gets in my mom's pickup truck. She had like this 90s model Sierra or Silverado or something like that. And you see the headlights come across the yard. And, as this is all happening, as my dad runs through the house, you see this thing, it turns and it just starts walking towards the woods. And I mean, like, it wasn't like it's pretty quick, but it wasn't running, it walks to the woods, but you could see this thing, go into the tall grass, which is pretty much what everything is out there that isn't your property, that you don't mow it. It's very tall grass. It's probably like 5 feet tall, it's very tall. It walks to the edge of the property, and you couldn't really see it anymore once it got kind of like that far out. But you see my dad's like these headlights go across the yard, and my dad actually chased this thing with the truck through the tall grass up and into the wood line. And there's kind of like it's like a hill. It's kind of like a mount that goes through that area. And my dad actually ended up high centering the truck on that area, chasing this thing. He got the truck stuck, and remember he ended up having to walk back to the house because the truck was stuck. And he wouldn't talk about it in front of any of us, but me and my brother, we stood outside the bedroom when he was talking to my mom about it, and he sounded, just absolutely terrified. Like my dad, just kind of like everybody else's dad, is kind of like you don't ever see your dad cry. You don't ever really see him scared. He's kind of a hard ass, growing up, and not much afraid of anything. And he sounded terrified. And I just remember, he's telling my mom that, it was huge, that it was the biggest thing he's ever seen. And it was like he said something like it knew that my dad was after it, like it didn't seem like it even, like it didn't put much effort. It didn't want to be caught, but it didn't seem like it was worried necessarily about him. And, so it really scared us as kids. And our bedroom, we have a window in our bedroom. And I remember I was so scared that uneasy, just not safe feeling that I had. I didn't want to sleep by the window anymore in my bedroom. I was asking my parents if we could just move my bed away from the window, like I don't feel safe anymore because I thought someone was going to reach in there and take me out of it, and it made my parents so nervous that they actually ended up building a fence around our property. That way, when we were outside playing, they would maybe have some peace of mind that we were kind of safe and, we would be in the fenced in area. Where we live out there is right at the bottom of this insanely big hill. It's very tall, and me and my brother used to play up on this hill, and not all the way at the top of it, but on like a lower section of it we would play. Actually, up there we had some trails and stuff that we would walk around up there, and there's actually some berries I grew up at that we'd go and pick. There's an area way further up that obviously we'd never been to before. Me and my sister, we decided to walk up that one day, and there was actually a massive cave up there. It was huge. Big enough for a grown man to walk inside of. It wasn't like some tiny little like wolf den or something like that. It was really big, and it stank. I remember that it stank, but I was terrified. I was kind of frozen, and my sister, she thought it would be hilarious to leave me there, and so she did. She took off running down the hill and left me there. And I was frozen, I was terrified because I thought, man, what if what we saw, what if this is where it, lives, and so it took me a minute, but I just, I finally decided to walk down the hill, but I did it walking backwards, it was very difficult. But I was so scared because I had that same unsafe, uneasy feeling. I was so scared to turn my back to that cave because, you know, I guess being a kid, I thought, you know, something's going to snatch me up, you know.
Yeah.
I remember a little later on, 4th of July comes around, and we were doing fireworks out in the driveway and the road with, you know, the family. I actually had set off a artillery shell on the ground, and I did not know that that's what it was at the time. I just grabbed something out of the bag and lit it, you know. And so whenever I lit it, I remember my sister's boyfriend and my dad had realized what I lit, and they were yelling, you know, get down. And so we all ducked, you know, and hid behind stuff, and that thing blew up on the ground. Well, maybe, you know, like not even 10 seconds or so after that went off, you just hear like this. I mean, it was like a scream in the woods, you know. I mean, like a blood curdling scream. Like it just like, we had this dog that my parents had got, you know, to kind of also have that peace of mind, you know, have a dog around for the kids and stuff. And it was like a Sheltie, and we named him Wolfie. And he was even, you know, he was laying on the ground like the whole time we were doing fireworks. He didn't move, like it wasn't anything to him. But when that scream or that sound, you know, when it went off, you know, that dog went up on all fours. Like, I mean, high alert, like he was concerned. And you got that same uneasy feeling. And I mean, it sounded far away, but it also sounded like it was right next to you. It was so loud, and it had like girth to it. Like it was from like deep in, you know, like it was loud. And after that, you know, my dad called it. He called the fireworks, and he's like, okay, it's time to go inside, you know, because like we had no idea what that was. So on this dirt road that we lived on, like I said, it was off of a main highway. Across the road from that, there's a big game fence. This probably like 10 or 12 feet tall. This guy owned a bunch of land out there, and he had like exotic animals behind that fence. Like he had buffalo and warthogs and all kinds of different deer. He actually had wolves. Like it wasn't uncommon to be driving down the main road and see like a wolf on the side of the road or something, you know, like, and he had actually come out there to some of the people's houses and let them know that he had a breakout on the back of that fence. And I wanted to add that in there because, like, you know, like I'm a firm believer, but, you know, also have like skeptical times or whatever. But I just wanted to, you know, add that in there. My Uncle Johnny, my dad's brother at the time, he lived also out there off that dirt road where we lived. And he kind of lived in like the more hillside of it. Like he kind of lived on the edge, kind of on a cliff almost. And we were all hanging out at their house one night. And, you know, all the adults are kind of drinking beer and, you know, relaxing. And the kids are playing tag in the dark and stuff out in the front yard and whatnot. And, golly, it's, I don't remember exactly what kind of like set my parents off, but they had saw, my dad and them had seen something, you know, off in the woods, and it was making all kinds of noise. It was like moving all the trees around and stuff. And, naturally, you know, they, you know, grab their guns and, you know, they want to go look at it. And I wanted to go with my dad. Like I wanted to see. So we're kind of walking along close to like the edge, not like, you know, like right on it, but close to the edge. And it's very thick wooded. It's very tall grass around that area. And I remember, you know, like we didn't have like LED lights or anything, but like we had like good old fashioned mag lights or whatever, which was like, you know, I guess the thing back then. My dad loved mag lights, and he had shined it over this area. And I mean, and I saw this thing, and I mean, it was huge. It was so tall. And what I saw before anything else was its ears. And like I was actually telling you the other day, you know, it, like you had said, it looked like Anubis, you know, like it looked like something from like the Egyptian times. Like it had massive ears, and it was tall, like you know, around these tree branches, tall. And I mean, as soon as that light hit it, I mean, it was like lightning fast. I mean, it moved, but it wasn't silent when it moved. Like everything in its way, it broke down to move. And my Uncle Johnny fired a shot at it, you know, with his shotgun. And and it sounded identical to the same scream that we heard that night when I had set that firecracker off out in the road, that artillery shell. But we were, you know, close to it this time. And, you know, as a kid, even as an adult, you know, a gunshot makes your ears ring, you know, especially a shotgun. But my ears were ringing from that, you know, and it was loud. But over that loudness of the ringing, I could still hear this just insanely girthy scream over like the ringing in my ears, and I felt so unsafe and terrified, scared, beyond all belief. And I remember I was grabbing my dad, and I started bawling, and I was like, I don't want to be here, let's go back, and everything. And my dad actually picked me up, and they took off running back to the house. I know he had a conversation with like my mom and my aunt, but I didn't get to hear any of that. He would not talk about it like in front of us, I guess probably because he was scared that, it would scare us more than we already were.
Yeah, that would definitely terrify me. Let me ask you, and I know there's other things you're going to go into, but I want to ask you about this creature. Were the ears like a Doberman pincher type ears? They're kind of perched up.
Yeah, like real pointy. Like, I mean, there was no fold to them. They were straight, and they had a real like pitch to the top of them. They were probably like the size of a man's hand, they were huge ears, tall.
Were you able to get a look at the creature's face? And my question is, was it more canine looking?
So when my dad had shined that light over it, it was actually kind of like the back angle, like the back corner of this thing's head, and he didn't know he was going to see anything. He was just turning his light, like across the trees and the grass, and he just happened to catch it, with that light. And, I just connected to it because, like you see trees and you see grass, but when you see something that isn't trees or grass, you lock onto that. And I guess it was just strolling on through there. There's not a lot of people that live out on that dirt road at the time. Like there's not a lot of people at all. And it's very much in the woods, like way back off in the woods. It's, 30 miles from town in any direction, it's very secluded.
It's very spooky though, man. I just had Roland on from, he lived like 2 miles from Skinwalker Ranch. And we were talking about the red eyes, and he talked about seeing these dogmen, and he would shoot them with a .22. It's all he had at the time. And they would scream. And I found that fascinating that he, because with the dogmen, there's very few accounts of them really doing anything but growling at you, really. Roland was talking about when they shot at it, or when he shot at it, it screamed. And you're kind of recounting the same thing, that when the shotgun blast goes off, I'm sure at the distance you guys were at, it was more like a lot of pellets hitting it, which I'm sure was painful. But to hear it scream, you hear Sasquatch scream all the time, but with Dogman, it's weird, man. It's really, really bizarre. But I don't want to interrupt the timeline. What else happened on that property?
So actually, after that had gone on, my uncle was so scared that he moved his family away from it. He listed it for sale, and they moved within a month. And that man that had come and kind of let some people know that he had a breakout in his fence. My dad and my Uncle Johnny kind of tried to say that it was probably just some buffalo or something, some big animal, from the game fence across the highway, and I mean, I guess that's possible, but man, I don't know what has ears like that. And I mean, this thing was taller than my dad, and my uncle, where, they're both 6 foot tall, man. I mean, they had, they were shining the lights, kind of at an angle, not necessarily up in the trees, but towards the trees. And I mean, I'm shaking right now, thinking about I was so scared as a kid to live out there in the woods and in the tall grass. I was terrified. I hated it. I was scared to sleep at night. I was scared to play if the sun was starting to go down. I hated being by the window, and I stopped going on the hill behind our house altogether. I remember during the day, we had a neighbor that lives probably a few miles down the road from us, would be the closest one. And my mom had actually sent me to go ask them if they had a can of corn that we could borrow. And I'm walking down the dirt road, and I get almost all the way to their driveway. And across the dirt road, there's a big collection of trees, it's like a big mushroom of trees, and I heard big branches breaking and stuff in there, and I got spooked, and I was like, okay, kind of sketchy, kind of scary. And I started to go down their driveway, and I heard it more, like some serious rustling. And so I decided, okay, no, I'm going back home. I'm going back home. So I turn around and I start walking back down the dirt road, and I'm kind of, quick pace walking, and it sounded like an elephant was running towards me, like the depth of the stomping that was on the ground behind me. I mean, I would imagine that's what it sounds like when something big, like an elephant or a rhino or something, comes charging at you, But it wasn't like a gallop. It sounded like a big long stride, like a man with some real long legs running towards me. And I heard I'm maybe 5 steps, maybe, And when I heard them, I got this lightning shock through my body. Like my spine lit up, and I just started running, and I started screaming, making as much noise as I possibly could, because I was probably, I was far from the house, and I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to die. There's no way I'm going to outrun whatever this thing is. And it stayed next to me, in the trees next to me, in that tall grass. You could hear it. And what you could hear more so over these loud elephant steps was this nasty huffing, like how rhinos sound almost whenever they or whatever, but it was fast sounding, really hefty breathing, and it had a wheeze to it, like someone with asthma breathing really hard, And I was bawling, and I started having a panic attack, and I was hyperventilating, and I made it to the house. And I ran in the door, and I'm bawling, and I can't get words out to tell my mom and dad, what's going on. And they get me to, to breathe and give me some inhaler puffs, and I tell them something charged at me, out there on the trees. And so, naturally, my dad and my mom, they're super protective. They go out there. My mom I remember she grabbed a PVC pipe, and I was I think back at it now, and I'm like, man, what are you going to do with the plastic pipe, But she grabbed a PVC pipe, and my dad grabbed his gun, and he walked all over that area, and he never found anything. But no matter what it was, something did chase me, because in that tall grass, like I said, there's tall grass, there's a trail of the grass that was pushed over from something running its way through there, so no matter what, something definitely chased me. I didn't imagine it it did, because it made its own trail through the tall grass when it chased after me.
Yeah, it's fascinating though too how it stayed with you on your side. You hear that reported by a lot of eyewitnesses. They never really seem to run you down, but they sure intimidate the hell out of you on your way out. Make sure you're, running off to the side, which is odd because most predators won't do that.
For real. And, so I hated living out there so much. It got to the point where I didn't want to go outside anymore. I didn't feel safe anymore. And every little thing, scared me. And thankfully, my mom's dad had passed away, and he had left this land to my mom that we lived on. Well, my mom's stepmom, she's a kind of an evil lady, and she did some forgery type stuff on his will, and actually ended up taking ownership of the property, and we had to move off of it. I was so happy about that, because I did not want to live out there anymore. I was terrified of it. I didn't ever want to live in the country. I always said when I grew up I would live in suburban atmosphere, with a house 10 feet away from me, because I was terrified now. And we actually moved to Granbury, which is not far from Lipan at all, but it's not really heavily wooded and, hill country, kind of like how Lipan was. And, kind of fast forward to me being a teenager here in Granbury, have these crazy things happen to me here. And I guess the first thing that ever happened to me, I used to get off the bus at my friend Colton's house. And it's probably 2 miles from my parents' house. I would stay with him, and we'd play Xbox. We'd play Call of Duty and stuff like that, until it got dark. And when it got dark, I would walk home. And I did this numerous times. And when you walk home, or when I walk home, I have to go down this main road. And on one side of it, there's this big, really nice, fancy house. It's huge. He's got a ton of land, cows and stuff there. And on the other side, it's the woods. One night, I am walking down that road, and just the worst smell. Like, I thought there was probably like a dead skunk or a dead animal on the side of the road. But golly, it stank. Like, make your eyes water kind of stink. And I remember thinking, golly, like, what is that? That is terrible. I start getting past kind of like when I play it back in my head, I feel like it's an archway into the trees and the woods, kind of an archway. And it has a little hill that you actually go down into. It's kind of like a valley that you go down into. And I start walking past that, and I hear, noises in the woods. And I'm like, oh, like, what's that? And I keep walking. I hear, I hear walking, kind of coming towards me, not fast, just kind of a slow pace coming towards me. And so I stop and I looked back, I looked around over there in the woods, and I didn't see anything. I listened. I didn't hear nothing. I sat there for probably like 20 seconds and no sounds. So I started walking again, and almost instantly after I started walking again, there's the footprints again, and there's trees, kind of crackling and twigs snapping, and so I was like, okay, so something's there. Something's definitely walking with me. And I got scared. So I kind of started jogging. And I maybe jogged like 15 feet. And I looked back. And right at that, like that archway of the trees was like this big, giant black mass. But the thing is, out here in Granbury, there is light. There's light from the city. So you can see, a lot better. It's not pitch black. And it was huge. And I remember the moon was bright, and there's lights from town, and I could see eyes like glowing, not necessarily like red or anything like that, but kind of like how animals' eyes glow when there's a little bit of light reflecting on them, not necessarily shining into them, but more so reflection. And it was huge. And when I saw that, it was kind of like flashback to being a kid, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to die. And I took off sprinting, and I used to skateboard, and I had these really expensive lime green Osiris shoes, and I never tied them. And I only tucked my laces in, and they flew off my feet, And so I ran home barefooted, or in my socks. I ran all the way home. And I get in my bedroom, I'm struggling to breathe and stuff. And I remember I called my girlfriend at the time, and I was bawling because I was so terrified. I was so scared, that I saw this thing. She thought I was crazy, and she was like, you didn't see anything. You just got scared, And I'm like, I've walked this, this way home so many times, and, I've never been scared. Like, nothing has even crossed my mind of being scared because I live in a town, like nothing happens in a town, and, or a city or whatever. And, so I was scared, and I never did the stopping at my friend's house anymore after that. And
I don't blame
actually ended up getting my license not long after that. I was in a band, and I used to go to my friend's house, and we would practice, and I would drive home afterwards. And on that same road where those woods are, there's kind of like an S bend in it almost. It's not super sharp, but there's enough of an S bend where you can't really see the other side of the road. And I'm coming down, it's a hill too, and so I'm coming down that hill to that S bend, and I have my brights on. I had thought that I had seen headlights coming towards me, so I'll go ahead and turn my brights off now. And so I flipped them off. Well, I actually kind of get about halfway through that S bend, and turns out there was no car. So I'm like, okay, I'll turn my brights back on, and I flipped them on. And I don't know if anybody else does this, but whenever I turn my brights on, I always look down at my dash, to see the little blue indicator come on that, like, hey, congratulations, you did indeed turn your brights on.
Yeah.
And when I looked back up, right on the corner of the road, like going towards the wooded area, and I, no doubt in my mind, on God, I saw Bigfoot, and he was huge, and he was kind of like a coppered color, like not like pinky, but like kind of like a burnt orange brownish kind of color, like he'd been rolling in some red clay almost. And like just yeah, I'm shaking. Like it scares me because I'm actually out by my mom's house right now. But yeah, and he went straight into the woods. But I mean, when I saw him, all those thoughts didn't go through my mind. What went through my mind is, oh, there's, something big's in the road, and I turned to miss it. And I actually ended up putting my truck into a skid, and I crashed it into the ditch of this guy's driveway, that really expensive house on all that land. I crashed my truck into his ditch. I messed up the whole front end and the fenders on it and everything, and ended up, having to, luckily it's right down the road from the house, but I had to have a tow truck, come load it up and bring it to the house, and it sat there in the driveway for a little while till I had worked up enough money to get it into the shop to get the front end and everything fixed.
Yeah, was it in the road then? So when you drove up on this thing, was it in the middle of the road?
It was literally on the edge, like the right side edge, like I'm in my right lane and it was right on the edge of the road. Like I had my brights on, and like it was like an '01 Silverado, I think is what I was in. And so the brights kind of shine more far out narrow than they do so much as wide. But I still had enough light to see this. It was on, its foot was right there on the white line on the side of the road going straight into the woods. I mean, so like it had come across the road, like no doubt in my mind it had come across the road. And what's really wild about the whole thing is that really expensive house actually turns out to later on in my life be the uncle of one of my girlfriends that I started dating. And, he recognized me and he was like, hey, you're that kid that crashed into my driveway, and I'm like, yeah, that was me. And, oddly enough, we sat there and started talking about it. And, he asked me, what caused you to crash? What'd you do? Were you just young and dumb, or what happened? And, so I told him the story, and what's so crazy is he told me, he was like, I don't want to spook you any more than you are, but I have been having llamas and cows, come up missing out here on my property. And then I find them, a day or so later. And he's like, and it looks like they got put through a shredder. Like he said, they are manipulated is what he said. Just shredded, torn to pieces, and he's like, and I can't figure out, yeah, we might have some coyotes out here, but, to completely just, take a full-size cow and just turn it into a pile of, mesh is pretty insane, and so that day I kind of just thought, what if, this thing goes over here to, his property, that what if this is, how he eats, because he's surrounded by the woods. I mean, he owns all the land down that side of the road, and he just built this really big castle type house, right there on the edge of it. And it's very strange, and so he had told me he was going to put, some cameras and stuff out there. And, since then I haven't talked to the guy. I don't know if he's had anything else crazy happen, but, for him to tell me that, he's had like cows and llamas or alpacas, whatever he had out there, come up missing and then find them, like way off on his property, just
it's
destroyed.
Strange. Yeah. Let me ask you, the thing on the side of the road, would you say it was more man-like, or would you say it was more animal-like? What was kind of, and I realized you got a glimpse and then you crashed, but your impression of, there's always, even a few seconds can seem like minutes, when you're in that moment. What's kind of your opinion when you saw this thing?
When I play it back, I don't see a man. Like I said, it was covered in like this coppery burnt, brownish fur, but it looked like, it wasn't soft fur. Like it was very coarse, like, like some person that just started growing a beard, and it's not, very lush. It's very coarse and wiry, It wasn't a blur, but it was like just a big, it was just a big thing, like I didn't make out like arms and stuff like that. I made out this big, massive brown and I turned my truck and, fishtailed it and went off into that driveway, the ditch of that driveway. I don't see a man, like that's, unless someone's running around in a brown ghillie suit, for fun or something, but No, I don't see a man. I believe, to this day, like I 100% saw, like a Sasquatch. And,
Yeah,
even
there's
now when I talk about it,
yeah,
people don't believe me.
well, there's
Go
definitely
ahead.
reports of it from where you're at. I'm curious from where you grew up, and then Granbury. How far away are the two places?
You could drive to Lipan from Granbury in about 30 minutes. 30 minutes, 35, maybe 40. No more than that. They're not crazy far apart, but Granbury used to be a very small town, and it's grown into a pretty big town. It's actually a pretty big tourist destination for whatever reason. But there are still plenty of woods over around here, and that's kind of where my parents live. They live in a neighborhood, but it is right next to all the woods. It's actually next to a train track as well. Which that is actually where I found that footprint that I had told you about, was off of those train tracks.
Yeah, tell me about the footprint. What was that on your parents' old property?
So no, so the footprint is off the road tracks by where my parents live now. And I had a friend over one night. We were just walking around. It was actually during the day. Actually, we went to walk through the neighborhood and then go down that main road. We were actually going to walk to the store. And my brother and his friends were actually already out walking to the store, quite some way up ahead of us, and we walked over the railroad tracks. And I remember I just looked to the right of the railroad tracks and, hand on the Bible, I saw a foot go into the woods, a foot, like the half of someone's leg and a foot, a bare foot go into the woods. And I was like, wow, and I nudged my buddy and I'm like, did you see that? And he's like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, I saw someone's foot go off into the trees, or into the woods. And he was like, what? And I'm like, yeah, for real, man. And he was like, maybe it's your brother or something, So we decided to start walking down the railroad tracks. And being, like teenagers, we were just talking about school and teenage stuff, what girl we wanted to date or something like that, and we walked a pretty good ways down those railroad tracks, and we came to a bridge on the railroad tracks, and we had looked down and there was a beaver dam, and we were thinking, oh yeah, we're gonna go mess with some beavers, we're gonna poke them with a stick or something, so we run down off the railroad tracks and we get down there by the beaver dam, and we did exactly that. We messed around with the dam, tried to see if we could see any beavers or whatever. And it's all watery down there, and there's some mud. And I looked down and there was a big footprint. I mean, a big solid, you can plain as day see toes. It was a footprint, and it didn't have any indention in the middle. Like, it was solid, flat all the way through. I was mind blown by it, because it was in the mud going up this little hill. And so I instantly, yelled at my friend. I was like, look at this, and I put my foot next to it, and I wear a size 13 men's shoe then, and I wear the same size 13 now. And this thing is probably 4 inches longer than my shoe is, next to it. And it's way wider than my foot was and my shoe. And so we're freaking out, and we're like, oh man, like, what is this? Because I saw a foot go out here, so like, that is a footprint. Like, and it wasn't like, and no offense to anybody's castings that they've ever done that don't really look like a footprint. This was a clear as day footprint. It wasn't like, oh, it kind of looks like a foot. Like, it was a foot. And, so we're like, wow, and so our first thought was, we need to go home and get the camera, because back then, like, we didn't have really good camera phones or anything. So I was like, my mom's got a digital camera. Thing is like an 8 megapixel camera. Let's go get it and we'll come take a picture. And so we start going back down the railroad tracks, and we get right to where the railroad tracks meets the road, and boom, there's my brother and his friends. And I'm like, did y'all go down the railroad tracks, And they were like, no, we went to the store. And so I told them what I saw and what we found, and they were like, oh, show us. So we go back down the railroad tracks, and we go back to the footprint, and we show them, and everybody's freaking out. His friends are like, wow, that's such a huge foot, And so we're like, we need to go get the camera. And so we run all the way back to my mom's house, and I get her camera, and we go all the way back to the footprint, and I take these pictures. I took like 3 or 4 of them, a couple of them with my shoe next to it, a couple of them, I think, with my hand, and some of just it itself. And, I put them on Facebook and showed everybody. And, looking back on it now, when we found it, it was fresh. Cause like I said, it was in the mud. Like, there was no dryness to it. It was fresh. And I would say an hour went by between us finding it and us getting back with the camera. And in the pictures, it's not so fresh anymore. It's kind of crusty and the mud's a little dried up and it's cracked. And I didn't think about that as a kid, you know, like this thing could have been right there next to us, you know, on the trees. And we had no idea, you know, because I mean, I didn't know any, you know, I didn't realize that it was a fresh footprint or anything, you know, and I didn't even think to look around for more, you know, like we found that one and we were just like on the moon, you know, like, holy crap, we found a footprint, you know, but I took those pictures and I still have them, you know, they're on my Facebook and everything, you know, of course, just like every other time I tell people anything, they all say, you know, oh, you're crazy, you know, you didn't find no footprint. And, you know, even my wife now, she tells me, you know, so some guy was walking around barefoot, big deal. And I'm like, who does that though? Like, you know, we were probably about a mile or at least, you know, more down this railroad track and it's got sharp rocks all over it. Who does that? Who walks barefoot through the woods in the middle of nowhere and then goes down by a beaver dam, you know, like barefoot, like,
yeah, especially in Texas,
so,
you know.
Yeah, and if so, why are their feet so big? You know, like.
Yeah, will you send it to me? I'd love to take a look at them.
I've 100% yes, yeah, I will, no problem at all.
Yeah, I'd love to check them out. And you know, beavers do attack people. Just a heads up.
I had no
Poke
idea,
them with a stick. The beaver's gonna throw you a beating, man. It's like a small rat coming at you.
I would say that. So the last, actually, we had another occurrence on the same railroad track, and with the same friend actually, but it was at night, and we went the opposite direction, which is actually towards more of kind of like the heavily wooded area, and they store these freight cars on this track because it's double-sided at night. And so we were actually walking on top of it, and we had a bunch of the black rocks because when you throw them at metal or another rock, they spark. So, you know, we're just being dumb and throwing them and watching them spark and talking. And we walked really far down the track this way, you know, for probably like an hour solid of just walking. And we finally stopped and we just sat on the top of the freight car, and we had, you know, piles of rocks up there, and we were actually throwing them into the woods. And, you know, it's very heavily wooded there. There's trees everywhere. So, like, you know, it makes the sound of a rock hitting the tree, you know. I chunked this, you know, decently sized rock out there. And instead of hearing it hit wood, it sounded like it hit something with, like, depth to it. You know, like it sounded like a fist to the chest. Like it was deep, you know. And because it was a change in sound, you know, it grabbed our attention. You know, we went from hearing, you know, rocks on trees to not that. And so we stood up. When you're that high up, you know, you can kind of see over the tree line, and, you know, with the moon out, you can actually, you know, there's some light. And within 10 or 20 seconds, you see this black dot, you know, coming through the air, and it was a rock, and it went straight between us and landed in the rocks behind us, and it sparked, you know. So, like, for sure something threw a rock back at us because it sparked. Like, it hit the ground behind us and it threw sparks off from hitting the other rocks. And then more rocks started coming, and it wasn't like a bunch at the same time. It was one after the other. You know, more rocks started coming and throwing sparks. They were hitting the sides of the freight cars of the metal, and you could hear it clanging and making all these noises and stuff, you know. And we started panicking. And so we took off running, and, you know, probably like, I don't know, a couple minutes into that, we realized it's not very safe to run on the top of these freight cars, but we were so scared to get down on the ground and be, you know, vulnerable. So we finally ended up deciding, you know, let's get on the ground, but we stayed on the other side of the cars away from the woods, and we ran, which was very difficult to do on railroad tracks covered in, you know, all these black rocks. And, you know, we ran and we ran and we ran. And like I said, we probably walked for an hour down the road tracks. We were deep down them. And, you know, we finally kind of got tired out and we started walking. And, you know, I guess we thought, you know, okay, well, we're a safe distance now, you know, like, we're probably fine. And so we started walking, and there's actually a road that goes right next to the railroad tracks. And it's separated by like a barbed wire fence on the side that we were on. If I remember right, we were actually talking about his girlfriend at the time, you know, like we kind of calmed down, and, you know, like we'd had our little, you know, wow, that was crazy, you know, maybe some person's out in the wood chunking rocks back at us, you know. And then you smelt something like a dead animal. And I mean, it was out of nowhere. I mean, like it just consumed you. It hit you like a train. It stank so bad, and I remember when I first smelled it, I was like, I hit my buddy and I was like, dude, did you rip, like, and he was like, no, dude. And he's like, I was about to ask you. And I'm like, no, man, like, hell, it'd have been loud, if I didn't, like, that wasn't me. And then more rocks, we heard them pinging, behind us, hitting the train. And so we freaked out and we started running again. And my buddy was like, let's jump the fence. Let's jump the fence and get on the road. Let's just get off the railroad tracks. Let's get away from the woods. Let's jump the fence and get on the road. And I was like, dude, it's barbed wire, like, we're going to get stuck. We're going to get ripped, and he convinced me. He's like, dude, it doesn't matter. Like, we need to go, like, and so we ran up to the barbed wire fence and, we ripped up our pants pretty good, but we got over that thing and we got on the road, and it took us way longer to get home because we got on the road instead of just taking the straight shot of the train tracks. But, it was worth it because we were terrified. And, every time that I've had something like this go on, like, it's that same feeling as a kid. Like, I felt like my body was trying to tell me, you need to go now. It is not safe. You need to go. And so, like, it's like a recognizable feeling. It's almost like it's programmed into your body. Like, your body, your senses know something that you yourself don't actually realize, and they're trying to warn you. And
what's your take on that, Jake? I mean, you hear a lot of eyewitnesses talk about that, that feeling of dread and fear. And you're a country boy. You grew up. I mean, I'm sure you ran into all kinds of predators out there in the woods, and you're scared. Anyone who, you come across a black bear, you're scared. You come across, I don't know that you guys really have black bears there, but I'm talking.
We had warthogs and snakes and stuff.
Exactly, hogs and that sort of thing. And you're scared. Anyone who tells you they're not scared is lying to you, but this is very different. Wouldn't you agree this is a very different type feeling?
Yes, 100%. Because actually, even as a kid, when we lived out there, we had a massive coyote problem and we had a massive boar problem. Like, our dog actually got into a fight quite a few times with coyotes out there, and it was scary. But I didn't feel like I stood in the front yard actually and watched my dog get into a fight with these coyotes. Like, I didn't have anything pushing me to be like, dude, what are you doing? Get out of here. And so what I think is, like, there's stuff about, Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever, people want to call them, that goes back, forever ago. I mean, it's on cave drawings, it's in, scripture. It goes back forever ago. And my mom always says, every legend starts somewhere. It starts with something, like, I don't believe someone just, some caveman sat in a circle on a fire and I was like, ooh, I'm gonna draw a big hairy man, like, it starts with something. And I think that because for, however many years, however many, decades, generations, whatever, that this thing has been here, people have known, you don't mess with it. And so I think that it's kind of something that just stays with you as a human, like, when you have that feeling, it's like that sixth sense or, that urge to keep yourself safe. It's not exactly, but it kind of reminds me of, like, as a kid when you're running up the stairs or something, you're like, oh man, what if someone's behind you chasing you? And you kind of get that little burst to go. But it's like that times like 1,000. Like, it consumes your body with just pure fear. Like, you don't want to turn around and look, but golly, what if it's right behind you? You have to, like, I think it's just something that stays with us.
Yeah, kind of like in our DNA somewhere.
Yes, like, it's part of us.
Yeah, let me ask you, as an adult, did you ever go back and talk to your dad about living on that property, or is he willing to talk to you about it?
Well, my dad passed away about 2 years ago from cancer. But I've had actually, my dad loved living out there. And, when we moved here, the one thing you always heard my dad say was how much he wishes we could move back out there because, out there you can go pee off the porch and, your neighbors don't see you, Yeah. And I would always tell him I hated living out there, Dad. I hate living out there. I'm so scared of it out there. So many things happened out there, and my dad would always be, he just brushed off. He'd be like, yeah, that whatever though, like, that's nothing, that's the country. That's how it's supposed to be. And I would you know, it would be like, you know, like I remember I told him one day, I was like, you chased something, you know, like you got in your truck and chased something through the woods, you know? And I remember he had told me, you know, he was like, well, yeah, you know, because I thought it was one of your sister's boyfriends trying to, you know, catch a peek at her. And I was like, yeah, you know, maybe you did, but when you came back, that is not what you thought. You know, you were scared. And he, you know, he's like, oh, I wasn't scared. And I'm like, I heard you. And like, me and Blake listened. That's my brother. His name's Blake. I was like, we listened to you, you know, tell mom. I was like, you were scared. Something scared you. And, you know, he would just always play it off like, you know, it wasn't that way. You know, and even like when I have these experiences out here, you know, and I told him, you know, like when it would happen, my dad would take me seriously, you know, like he was on my side 100%, you know, he would try to calm me down and he was, you know, right there. He didn't ever tell me, you know, you're crazy or anything. But after, you know, it's kind of passed and happened, you know, he just jokes around and he's like, yeah, he didn't see nothing, you know, kind of ordeal. I wish, you know, kind of now, I wish there's a lot of things I wish that I'd done with my dad now that, you know, he's not here. But I do wish that I would have, you know, really just kind of sat down with him and asked him, you know, like, what did you see, you know, when you did that? What happened? You know, like I remember as kids, you know, I talked his ear off about it, but he would never tell me, you know, and I guess probably because he didn't want to scare us anymore. But I know my dad was scared. You know, I could hear it in his voice. He was terrified. And even that night, you know, whenever my uncle shot whatever that was out there, my dad he picked me up, you know, like I could have ran, but he grabbed me. Like he was scared. He wanted to get me out of there.
Yeah. Well, sometimes it's easier. You don't want to terrify your kids. I'm sure your dad had good intentions, and God rest his soul. Right. I'm sorry to hear he passed. My dad died of cancer too as well. So I'm sorry to hear that. And, you know, he sounds like a great man. You know, you never want to have your kids be terrified. You know, right. You know, you don't want to go in and tell your kids, yeah, there's monsters out there. You know, you want them to be at peace.
And I have kids now, you know, and so like I understand, you know, now like I wouldn't tell my son something that would make him because I was already so scared already, you know, I wouldn't tell him anything to make him terrified more than he already is, you know, and I think that's all my dad was trying to do.
I think so too. I think that your dad was, you know, trying to keep the peace, you know, as far as he probably didn't know what it was, you know, and he just wanted everyone to have an ease of mind, you know. What do you think that Sasquatch is, Jake? What's your opinion?
You know, I have believed ever since that first night that we saw that thing standing by that tree branch. And, you know, my opinion has changed so many times over the years of what I think that he is. You know, I've thought, you know, at one point that he was like an entity, you know, like how people believe in like the orbs and stuff and how he can just vanish and appear. You know, there are people that have said that, you know, he's actually just a wild man. You know, he's just a man that never civilized like the rest of us did, just a wild, you know, person. And I guess it's hard to say, but from my encounters, my, you know, experiences, I think that not necessarily that it's, you know, like a gorilla or, you know, an ape or something. I think that it's kind of like the giant squid. It's its own thing, you know, it's its own creature. I think that it is an animal that has been around since forever, you know, just like all these other animals have. And I think that it doesn't want to be messed with or found like most animals don't. And I don't think that it's some big scary monster that you see in all these horror films that's out to, you know, kill you and rip you apart and, you know, and abduct you out of your tent when you're camping. I think it's a curious creature that wants to check you out like most animals do. And I think that it will defend itself when it feels threatened like most animals do. And I think that it's just so hard for people to believe in them because of all these horror movies and flicks about, you know, some big wild Bigfoot or Sasquatch that's tearing people apart through the countryside. You know, I think it's been manipulated into something that it's not. I really think that he's just an animal, a creature, just like all the other ones are. And, you know, there's so much land and forest that we haven't even touched yet. You know, so all the people that say, you know, well, if there's something that big out there, you know, we would have found it by now. And I think that's false. You know, like there's no way. I mean, there's just no way. That's not logical to think, in my opinion. You know, I think people are just scared to admit that something like this could be real, you know? And yeah, you know, there's people out there that they make hoax and they fake, and they want to tell their untrue stories and stuff, to get reactions from people. But I don't believe at all that every person is doing that. I've listened to many of your podcasts, and I'm still listening to them. I listen to them all day in my ear, with my earbuds, and you can hear it in people's voices, when they retell their story, like, it's genuine, it's real. They were scared, they were terrified. I remember I listened to this one actually yesterday of a man that was in the woods with his kids, and he said like some big tree fell over, and he remember it was, right there with them. And so he walked backwards to his car, terrified because he didn't want to turn his back on it. And, he had blared his horn or whatever, right before he drove off. And he described like, how scared he was and that fear. And that I feel he described exactly how I felt to a T each time that this has happened to me. That is how I felt, just terrified to the bone.
Yeah, it'll definitely strike terror in you. And I think the encounters that you've had, it's a very unique experience. Most people who live out in the country like that, they'll always tell you they have some of the best encounter stories because they're in the middle of nowhere. It's like your neighbor is 5 acres away or a mile down the road.
Right.
And they, so they are out and about. It is a fascinating account though, man, of sharing it. And I appreciate you taking the time to come on and share your encounters and share what happened to you and your family, man. It's scary, but it's something that'll stick with you. And you're definitely right. They're out there.
Right. And it, man, it's an honor to come on to the show, man. I always hear you say it on everyone, if you have an encounter that you want to share, send me an email. And I sent it, and I didn't expect to hear from you, and so when you emailed me, I was like calling my wife, and I was like, you're not going to believe this, so it was an honor to be on your show, man. Truly it is. I love what you do. I love your show, your website. Like, you're doing it great, man. So
yeah, the honor was mine.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, the honor was mine having you on. Thank you again.
100%, man. You're very welcome, and thank you for having me.
Thanks again, Jake. And that's it for tonight, everyone. Remember, if you've had an encounter, shoot me an email. My email address is wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. If you get a chance, check out sasquatchchronicles.com. You can become a member and get additional shows. Until next time, everyone.
Intoxicating danger I like. Save me from myself, let me drown in my black lake. Let me float away. Save me from myself, let me drown in my black lake. Beauty is a black lake, let me sail away. Beauty is a black lake, let me sail away. Darkness approaching, deep water keeps flowing. It inhales me in the stormy tide. Endless emotion, a dawn thought, a notion, an epiphany. pressure to lie. Save me from myself.